came from major corporations like General Electric, and it seems to me ludicrous that these Fortune 500 companies, governments, think tanks are not looking at planning for 20, 30, 40 years out, because these companies want to exist for the next 20, 30, 40 years, at some level. So can you confirm that Fortune 500 companies are looking at these problems, and if they are, do they have plans that can be spread out to the rest of the country?
Absolutely. Some of them are, not all. I had an opportunity to work with one of the largest construction firms in the world. So these are the people who do the really huge projects, like when they're building a whole island out of nothing in Dubai or something like that. And they were very concerned with resource issues because they noted that several of the key resources that they need, and they're dealing in hundreds of millions of tons of stuff, cement and whatever they're using. And so they realized that, if their average lifespan plant is 50 years, then they have to now build these plants in places where they're reasonably certain that they can get 50 years of something directly out of that resource base. Like, here's an example. You've probably heard there are no new refineries have been built in the United States in a long time. There are a couple reasons for that. It's a regulatory nightmare. But the truth is that today, to build a refinery, you only build a refinery which is tuned for a specific grade of crude, either light sweet all the way down to heavy sour. You build this refinery tuned for a specific feedstock, and there are serious questions now as to whether anybody could lock up a 40 or a 50-year supply of any specific feedstock to justify that investment. In the old days, 20, 30 years ago, they would just build a refinery confident that the feedstock would be there, but that's not true anymore. So we're seeing a real dearth of refining capacity now, particularly for light sweet crude, because that's the stuff that's pretty much missing. That's the stuff we tapped first. It's the best. We ran through it. And now we're down to the heavier, sour grades, right? That's what the tar sands of Canada are, the Orinoco Belt out of Venezuela, the new stuff that Saudi Arabia's almost scooping out of the ground. It's so thick. And there's a lot of that stuff because nobody really wants it. It's a nightmare to process, but we can, and we probably will a little bit. So I know that the major oil corporations are already well over this story because they have to manage a story of depletion. There's companies out there that are in the high-tech space who rely on specific things. So if you want to get a really interesting graph, which I have in the book, is how many years of known reserves we have of certain key things. So things like indium and gallium, very hard to come by. They're really going to be running out within the next 10 or 15 years. And so when we hear these exciting, like there's that company in Los Angeles, awesome. They print like on a giant HP printer. They just print thin film solar, and they can print a megawatt of them a day. It sounds great. Just run the machines and we'll just print up several hundred gigawatts and we're done, right? And the answer is no. Their process requires gallium and indium, and there's just not enough of either of those two substances to print even enough solar cells out of that process to light up LA alone. So we have to really now look at what are the critical elements that are out there and understand that there are a lot of very rare processes requiring even rarer elements, and those are all going to shift over time. So the future belongs to those corporations that can figure out how to use common, still abundant materials in their processes and make the best use of those. But absolutely, corporations are looking at this now. But most particularly those that have identified elements that are already in a 10 or 20 year scarcity horizon window.
So I'm going to turn it over to our sustainability instructor here. This is John Fitzpatrick.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, John.
Are you familiar with Jeremy Rifkin?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. He seems to have had great influence in Europe, and particularly with Chancellor Merkel, and it's obvious that Germany and the EU have taken to his ideas. Have you worked with him, or have you worked on any kind of policy change? Because it's obvious to me that we have a monster to take care of that is on a policy level. It's not going to be exclusively on a commercial business venture. We have to take a Manhattan Project style approach to this. And I'm very interested in Rifkin's success, so to speak, because I've heard that he influenced Merkel's development of solar panels or solar development on buildings. It reached to like 1 million buildings in Germany last spring, and I'm sure it's more than that now because there are incentives and so forth. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on policy and influence on Washington and how where you see some things happening that might be positive, and what your thoughts are on that. And then
Yeah, I personally haven't spent any time working on policy issues or trying to influence policy, and there are a couple reasons for that. I don't believe that the ability to influence Washington in a major structural way is possible for somebody at my level right now. I truly see the pace and the scope of these changes are so overwhelming the ability of our policymakers to proactively deal with them. I think we'll the United States does great in crises. So if we really hit a major crisis, I think then we'll sort of wise up. But at cruising speed and altitude, there's not a lot of shifting going on there. It's been rather startling to me. So we had Stephen Chu, head of a Department of Energy, and he was unable to even articulate the concept of peak oil or its relevance, or that resources are in any way limiting or scarce. And I know he understood that stuff. I know he does. And it's just mysterious to me that even somebody as well placed as him is unable to even utter the basic words in public. And so I've gone to where the action is. If I can directly influence a very wealthy family or a large corporation to take steps that are in alignment, I think that's necessary. And I think it's the first step. First, because the actions get taken today, which is really important. And secondarily, I can't think of, so what we're really talking about, like if, let's sake of arguments, this country suddenly decides to seize upon global warming. We really want to limit our carbon put into the atmosphere. Well, there's only two major sources of carbon into the atmosphere that we can really control. One is coal, and the other is the natural gas and oil. The one for electricity, one for moving things around, I guess. So if we were going to believe that, we would have to fundamentally challenge the status quo and say we are no longer a country that's about putting as many cars on the road and building as many things and extracting stuff as fast as possible because that's the most profitable. We'd have to come up with a whole different story about who we are and why we are. That changed to the status quo. So as I look back through history, I struggle to find any changes to the status quo that actually came from Washington, D.C. So civil rights, labor rights, the environmental movement, anything that you can think about, all were brought kicking and screaming from the outside in, meaning that first there has to be sort of a critical mass of awareness, there has to be a shift in the population, and then there's a chance Washington will grudgingly, step into it and pick it up and run with it. So I haven't spent a lot of time personally working on that because I don't think we even have the critical mass of understanding yet necessary to really challenge the status quo.